So we're very excited to welcome Professor Massimo Nato, who teaches economic history here at Bocconi University and history of economic thinking. Professor Emiliano Brancaccio of the Università del Sannio and Professor Maffezzoli of the Università Bocconi. The reason of this event is simple. Economists have a huge influence over our society, and so it is important to see what we teach to economists, and if what we teach to economists is adequate to the reality of the world. So we will discuss these topics. Each speaker will give a brief speech of 25 to 30 minutes, and then there will be time for a debate. You will be free to ask questions, to say your thoughts, and everything. Thank you for coming.
Brief introduction. When I was a student here in Bocconi in the 80s, a long time ago, after a period of latency, the history of economic thought began to be taught again. And what made me to decide to follow the course was a statement in the syllabus. The statement was the following: economics as a science is not a Darwinian discipline. What was meant was that the history of economic thought cannot be seen as a cumulative sequence of paradigms, but rather as a field in which different paradigms and perspectives are equally possible and legitimate. I have to confess that the course confirmed this view to my eyes. But surely one can also disagree with this statement. This is why I asked the two speakers to take into account the issue of the paradigm in economic thought in the way they feel it more appropriate. So now the floor is to Brancaccio for 30 minutes, I think. Then to Maffezzoli. Then I think that we can allow 5 minutes to both speakers to interact within them, and then you are kindly requested to make questions, not statements, questions. Okay?
Yes, it is not an economics is not a Darwinian discipline, but Darwinian processes happen. Sometimes. First of all, let me thank Rethinking Economics for the invitation to this stimulating seminar. In my view, the question to which this seminar is dedicated, do we need to rethink economics education, is very important, and in some way it seems to be even urgent. In my speech I will take inspiration from some of my works published in Cambridge Journal of Economics, Structural Change and Economic Dynamics, and so on. The drafts of these papers can be found in the research page of my website. But most of all, I will take inspiration here from some of my interactions with Olivier Blanchard. As you probably know, Blanchard was chief economist in the International Monetary Fund during the years of the so-called Great International Recession. And furthermore, Blanchard is also author of Macroeconomics, one of the most famous macroeconomic textbooks in the world, whose European edition was written with the collaboration of Alessia Nighini and Francesco Giannazzi. In my view, Blanchard's book can be considered as the best mainstream macroeconomics textbook of the last 20 years. Well, last December at Feltrinelli Foundation in Milan, I had the opportunity to debate with Blanchard about the future of economic theory and policy, and also of macroeconomic teaching. Part of our dialogue in Milan was dedicated to my little textbook, Anti-Blanchard Macroeconomics, which represents a possible constructive criticism of Blanchard's approach to macroeconomics. The debate with Blanchard was also published last September by the Review of Political Economy, and furthermore, our dialogue also inspired a symposium published on Moneta in Credito with economists of several schools of thought, Alessia Nardini and Francesco Giavazzi, Giovanni Dosi, Mauro Gallegati, Heinz Kurz, and others. The links to both publications too can be found in open access on my website. Well, I've been dealing with the evolution of Blanchard's thought for many years. And Blanchard was one of the great builders of mainstream macroeconomic apparatus. He contributed to the construction of standard macroeconomics in a brilliant and never banal way, but without ever hesitating about his membership in the mainstream. Blanchard's approach can be summarized in 2 points, which he himself defined as the core of mainstream macroeconomics. First, in short run, real GDP, employment, functional income distribution, and other real macroeconomic variables can be influenced by movements in aggregate demand. Second, however, in the medium-long run, free market forces tend to bring real macroeconomic variables to their natural equilibrium. And this natural equilibrium is primarily determined by the so-called neoclassical fundamentals of endowments, technology, and preferences, and cannot be influenced by aggregate demand. As you know, this framework has been widely held among economists, and Blanchard himself, on the eve of the Great Recession, still defined this approach and defended it. In 2008, a few weeks before the collapse of Lehman Brothers, he still wrote that the state of macro is good, and with the term macro, he precisely meant mainstream macroeconomics and its basic core. In subsequent years, however, after the crisis and after his personal experience as head of the IMF research department, Blanchard's positions changed in a significant way. Blanchard's changes have occurred in various areas, from advanced research to economic policy. But in this seminar, it is important to emphasize the change of view that has characterized his approach to teaching macroeconomics. As you may know, for almost 20 years, Blanchard based his macroeconomics textbook on the so-called AS80 model. From 2017 onwards, however, he replaced the old AS80 with a different model, which is called IS-LMPC. I don't want to entertain you with history of economic thought. Maybe Massimo will tell something about that. I will only remark that the IS-LMPC represents an update of the old 1937 Hicks model, and at the same time it implies a rejection of Rethinking thesis about wage and price flexibility, which are incorporated in the AS80 model. The fundamental differences between these two models concerns the spontaneous capacity of the economy to converge or not towards natural equilibrium. If you remember, the core of mainstream macroeconomics states that in the medium-long run, the spontaneous market forces should bring the economy to the so-called natural equilibrium. This was the optimistic view implicit in the ASAD model. In this model, at least in principle, if there is an economic crisis provoked by a drop in aggregate demand, then wage and price downward flexibility should be enough to return to the natural equilibrium. Economic policy is not essential, at least in theory. Things change, however, in the new Blanchard's approach based on the IS and MPC model. In this different analysis, if there is a fall in aggregate demand, production and employment, then downward wage and price flexibility in this case does not help. On the contrary, it can cause damage. In fact, if wages and prices fall, then real interest rates increase, and this can lead to a further decline in aggregate demand and employment. The economy is increasingly moving away from the natural equilibrium. In the new Blanchard model, then, in order to get back into equilibrium, it is essential to have an immediate intervention by the authorities through expansion in monetary policy and maybe even fiscal policy. In analytical terms, we can say that Blanchard's change of view concerns the stability of natural equilibrium. In the new approach, natural equilibrium can be considered unstable. Wage and price changes can move the system away from the equilibrium. Then, to preserve the natural equilibrium, a conscious action by political authorities is needed. Well, the abandon of the ASAD model has been a great change for macroeconomic teaching. Today, the former chief economist of the IMF and one of the leading members of the mainstream approach tells us that the spontaneous forces of free market can generate instability. This means that it is a mistake to rely on wage and price deflation in order to face the crisis and correct imbalances. But beyond teaching, Blanchard goes even further. In the field of research, he raises doubts not only on the stability of natural equilibrium, but even on the very existence of this equilibrium. You should remember that for the core of mainstream macroeconomics, the natural equilibrium is ultimately determined by the fundamentals of neoclassical theory, that is, endowments of productive factors, preferences of economic agents, and available technology. The natural equilibrium cannot be influenced by other elements, such as changes in aggregate demand. Well, in this recent paper, Blanchard asks if this concept of natural equilibrium should be rejected. I must point out that his answer to this question is interlocutory, is prudent, but the simple fact that he raised it could become relevant for the evolution of economic research. It is no mystery that for some years now, Blanchard has shown some sympathy for heretical scholars, such as Minsky, Caldor, and others. As you can read here, Blanchard is in favor of drawing inspiration from alternative schools of thought. The very fact that last year he participated in a debate with the author of an anti-Blanchard book is nothing but a banal consequence, I think, of his greater openness to alternative approaches. Now, what are the implications of this openness to alternatives? Well, one crucial feature of these alternative approaches is that they refuse the neoclassical tradition. In other words, they reject the intertemporal equilibrium which is typical of general neo-Walrasian models, and also reject their macroeconomic reductions based on the concept of natural equilibrium. Instead of these neoclassical theoretical objects, the alternative schools propose a different concept of equilibrium, For example, according to some of these schools, a sort of equilibrium can derive from the so-called reproduction schemes, which are typical of the traditions of von Neumann, Sraffa, Leontiev, and many others. Now, it must be said that these differences between the neoclassical and the alternative approach are not elementary. Their understanding takes time. Many professional researchers are unable to describe these differences between paradigms. This difficulty also depends on the fact that for a long time communication and dialectics between the different schools of thought have been lacking. There has been incommunicability on these issues. This lack of communication among schools of thought, in my view, has not helped the progress of economic science, neither within the mainstream nor in that of alternative research. Fortunately, thanks to Olivier Blanchard and others, and many others, things seem to change today. There might be a problem, however. After many years of lack of communication, how can we foster a revival of dialectics between schools of thought? How? And above all, how can we explain to students the basic results of this dialectic? How can we expect to teach the complex distinction between the mainstream approach and the alternative paradigm? It is a complex issue. And I think it is important because, in my view, students should immediately know this distinction. Well, to try to solve this problem, one possible way may exist. This way is called comparative approach to economic theory. This comparative approach was used extensively during the 20th century by scholars of all schools of thought, from Hahn and Samuelson in the neoclassical field to Rother and Dobb in Marxist camp. The crucial feature of the comparative approach is that it uses just one system of equations for the different theories examined. The transition from one theory to the other theory takes place through modification in functional forms of equations and reversal of rules of exogenous and endogenous variables, which imply a reversal in logical relations between them. The initial system of equations thus acts as a sort of stereogram. That is, very different conclusions will be reached in terms of economic analysis and policy in relation to the viewpoint from which the same system is examined. A stereogram, right here. Yes, at some point you should be able to see a camel, but this is not very important. Obviously, the comparative approach does not make possible to examine the entire range of epistemological differences between the compared theories. Okay? I don't want to make Massimo angry about that. However, this method presents the unquestionable advantage of immediacy by showing that apparently marginal changes in hypotheses can lead to completely different deductions. This is its strength. And now, let me show how the comparative approach works. Clearly, I can only give some suggestions here. For example, we can start from the anti-Blanchard textbook, and we can consider a first comparison between two simple macroeconomic models, the traditional AES-AT model and an alternative model. In the anti-Blanchard, we start from the same system of equations. You can see a part of this system at the top of the slide. So we show that it is possible to determine the traditional ASAT model or an alternative model simply by changing two hypotheses. The first hypothesis concerns the gamma parameter, which indicates the sensitivity of aggregate demand and production to changes in the quantity of money and prices. The second hypothesis concerns the exogenous or endogenous character of the markup, indicated by the term mi. If we assume that gamma is greater than 0 and that mi is exogenous, then the model becomes the traditional ASAT, which final equations are described on the left. But if we assume, then we create the alternative model. Two simple changes in hypothesis, and the world is completely reversed. Please, let's have a look to the term E, which represents the autonomous components of aggregate demand. As you can see, in the traditional model, the term E does not influence the natural equilibrium levels of production and employment. On the contrary, as you can see, in the alternative model, the term E is relevant for the determination of production and unemployment. Furthermore, let us consider the term Z, which represents a synthesis of labor market institutions. For example, if you have firing costs, which increase the rigidity of the labor market, then you have a high level of Z. But if you reform the labor market in order to reduce firing costs and increase labor flexibility, then you have a lower level of Z. Well, as you can see on the left, in the traditional model, an increase in labor flexibility and a consequent decrease in Z provoke an increase in production and a decrease in unemployment. On the contrary, in the alternative model, a change in Z has no effects on the equilibrium levels of production and unemployment. Little changes in hypothesis, two very different views of economic policy. And obviously, these are extremely simple models built only for educational purposes. However, we can use them to pose a relevant question, even at more advanced level of analysis. The relevant question is, how can we choose between two different views of the world? For example, how do we decide what the right unemployment equation is? Is the one on the left which tells us that to reduce unemployment we need to increase labor flexibility? Or is the one on the right which tells us that instead we should increase autonomous demand, for example? Well, the most obvious answer, not exhaustive, but the most obvious, even if completely preliminary, is that we should choose on the basis of empirical evidence. In this regard, in the anti-Blanchard appendix, we update a well-known 1999 OECD test that verifies the existence or not of statistical relationships between unemployment and worker protections, that is, labor rigidities. As you can see on the left, this test shows that there are no significant relationships between unemployment, which is on the vertical axis, and labor rigidity, which is on the horizontal axis. Obviously, the OECD test is very simple and it is also methodologically a little outdated. However, as you can read on the right, the major international institutions, International Monetary Fund, World Bank, and again the OECD, point out that the most recent empirical literature gives very similar results on that. Then the empirical evidence available seems to be more in line with the unemployment equation in the alternative model rather than the traditional AS-AD model. And well, this is a typical example of empirical analysis applied to a comparative approach to theory. But we can go deeper and apply the comparative approach to growth and distribution theory. Let's start from a well-known graph and on the left and related system of three equations on the right. First of all, let's interpret the graph and the system of equations in the traditional terms of Solov's growth model. This model can be considered the most simple and essential representation of the neoclassical natural equilibrium without asymmetries and without imperfections. In order to simplify the analysis, let's consider an economy which produces just one commodity, corn, by means of corn and labor. Okay? This is not a problem for traditional analysis, this is a problem for Sraffian analysis, but I don't want to complicate things. Well, here we can see two kinds of equilibrium. A non-stationary equilibrium represented by a capital labor ratio given by K0, and a steady growth equilibrium represented by KSS. As you know, under standard conditions, the tendency of the economic system is from any non-stationary equilibrium towards the steady growth state. But the important point for us is that in every possible equilibrium in the Solov model, the interest rate is always endogenous. In this model, the interest rate always represents an index of relative scarcity of capital with respect to labor. Then R is always endogenous. It is determined by technology and the ratio between scarce endowments of capital and labor. The causal relations always go from K to R, never vice versa. But now, if we apply the comparative approach to this model, then we are legitimate to ask a very provocative question. If we accept the hypothesis made by Piero Sraffa of an exogenous interest rate, then what happens to this model? Obviously, put in these terms, the question is very brutal. The epistemological and theoretical steps that are needed to compare the neoclassical growth models with every Sraffian hypothesis are very complex. However, we could say that brutality is the precise quality of the comparative approach. It tries to go directly to the basic differences and contradictions between theories. Then let's consider now the graph and the system of equations in these different terms. In this alternative case, when we ask what happens with an exogenous interest rate, the only logical answer, this is a reply to Ham. Okay, the only logical answer is that the causal relation between the interest rate and the endowments is totally reversed. The interest rate contributes to determine the ratio K between endowments of corn and labor, not vice versa. In this sort of Sraffian reversal, the causal relation goes from R to K. As a consequence, the endowments must adequate to the interest rate. That is, corn and labor will be produced up to the ratio which is consistent with that exogenous interest rate. Once again, with a seeming trivial change of exogenous and endogenous variables, we actually jump from one word to another, from the neoclassical paradigm of scarcity to what can be called a Sraffian Keynesian paradigm of reproduction. And once again, the implications for economic policy can be relevant. Let me give you just one final example. As you know, this is a simple, very simple, graphical solution to verify the stability conditions of the ratio between government debt and GDP. You know that. In the case described on the left side, there is no stability even with primary surplus. While on the right side, you can see a case of stability even with primary deficit. As you can understand, these are two very different situations. The first one rather uncomfortable, the second one much easier for policymakers. Well, you see that the slope of the debt equation is crucial for understanding whether we are in one or the other situation. And the slope, as you know, depends on the difference between the interest rate R and the growth rate G. Well, if we accept the sort of model that you saw before, these two variables depend only on the neoclassical fundamentals of technology, preferences, and above all, the scarce endowments of capital and labor. This means that these variables cannot be modified by Keynesian policies. On the contrary, in a Schaffian framework, both R and G can be influenced by economic policies. In this case, therefore, through policies it is possible to pass from one graph to another, that is, from an unstable world to a stable one. Obviously, this is an extremely simple exercise. The reality is much more complex, but this difference is relevant, and it can persist also in more complex analysis. In conclusion, the comparative approach to economic research and teaching has many possible applications, not only in pure theory, but also in the field of economic policy. These are two further papers which apply the comparative approach to some problems within the European Monetary Union. The first paper proposes a critique of the traditional Taylor rule of monetary policy and a logical reversal of it, which we can call solvency law. This reversal allows us to examine some typical problems of the monetary union, such as the ECB difficulty in achieving inflation targets, for example. The second paper applies the comparative approach to investigate the possible causes of interest rate spreads during the euro crisis between 2010 and 2012. It shows that spreads can depend on imbalances in external accounts rather than government accounts. I used the theoretical and empirical results of these papers also in two recent debates with Romano Prodi, Mario Monti and others, to whose realization, among other things, rethinking economics once again contributed. And in these seminars, the comparative approach to alternative theories allowed me to propose alternative interpretations of the history of European economic policies. And the consequent debates were very interesting, I think. Very interesting. Then, in conclusion, the comparative approach to economic research and teaching has certainly many limitations. It cannot address all the complex epistemological and theoretical features of alternative paradigms in the economic science. However, this approach has the merit of simplicity and immediacy. We could even say brutality, okay? We can even say brutality. For these features, I think, it can stimulate attention of students and young scholars and debate among economists. And today I think that we need to stimulate communication and debate among economists. Thank you so much.
I'm really happy to be here. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm delighted to see so many students interested in this debate. Okay, just to anticipate, let me tell you that I don't agree with many things you say, but with one thing I agree fully: we need to talk a bit more. We need to communicate a bit more. I fully agree with that. I find that complete. Okay, so I have 7-8 slides to show you. I didn't really know the level of my audience, so probably I should have been too high. I don't know. Let me know if I missed my aim. So I targeted for 3 years student with some economics background. I hope I got it. Okay, good, very good. So, debate, do we need to rethink economic education? Very interesting question, very relevant question, extremely relevant question. Given my very interesting slides, I will focus on economics. Because there are many other interesting things to say about micro too, of course. Okay, so what I'm going to do is to divide this question into two related issues. Should we rethink how economics, and in particular macroeconomics, is done? And of course, that's a very relevant question. I think my colleague Brancaccio may agree with me. And the answer to this question is yes. Should this affect the way we teach it? Okay, of course, you cannot answer the second question without saying something about the first one. And that's the reason why I'm going to devote some time to both of them. Okay? So I briefly, well, not so briefly, at the end, because this thing grew beyond my first ideas. So I briefly address the first question in the following slide and then turn to the second. Okay, let me anticipate conclusions. I don't know how many will like my conclusions here, but I'm here to discuss. Yes, to the first question, to a certain extent. And you know what? We're actually already doing it quite extensively. And the second question, the answer is, oh, probably yes. But you have to be very careful here, okay? So necessarily in subtle and not destructive ways. And the reason why I'm telling that will be clear in a while. I mean, the way I see it will be clear in a while. So let me start with the first one. Should we rethink how economics is done? Well, probably yes. In the sense that the Great Recession, everybody knows probably in this room, had a huge impact, not only on our economies, but on the way we think about macro, about economics in general. Macro particulars. Long-lasting consequences. I'm still teaching right now in all my courses about the financial crisis, which happened 10 years ago. So that's what I call a long-lasting effect in economic theory. And in our everyday life, because essentially, for instance, the way monetary policy is conducted nowadays is actually a direct result of what happened during the Great Recession. Okay, so we're still living, essentially, the consequences of that event. Okay? So, from a theoretical point of view, can be highlighted, okay? Has been a huge blow to the credibility of what at the time was the standard New Keynesian dynamic stochastic general equilibrium model. The New Keynesian dynamic stochastic general equilibrium. So the essence of the classical thought essentially adapted a little bit to Keynes. That is actually still now the standard in macro theory. Now, I mean, you can talk for days about this, honestly. Okay, you can spend days talking about this. So essentially, the intuition is, well, they suddenly appeared as models designed to explain sunny days only. Model designed to explain normal life. So the normal life before the Great Recession. Okay? And suddenly the Great Recession arrives, and everything seems very much more complicated than people actually thought. And there's an extremely nice paper by Ricardo Caballero on the Journal of Economic Perspective. It's an old one, 2010. It's very interesting. I suggest you to read it. By the way, if you need some details on the references, I don't have a nice slide like you, but just write me a message. I'm going to send you the papers. Okay? There's a very nice paper by Caballero, a very caustic view about the reasons for this inability to capture how the real world works. Now, again, I don't have time to dig into details, to be honest, because we spent all the days discussing this. And, there's been a lot of discussion about it. But what I'm interested here now is the implications for research, for economics has done now. Okay? And there are many, many interesting implications. Okay? First of all, Minsky was vindicated at last. Okay? I like Minsky a lot. Okay? So Minsky was really catered at us. And now there's a lot of attention in the literature about boom-bust financial cycles. Okay? Now the problem is that, as many here probably know, Minskyan ideas are very difficult to model. Okay? It's not really so obvious how to model that. But there's a lot of interest in the literature right now. Actually, I'm going to mention a paper later on in this slide presented last week here in Bocconi, and think about that, okay, in the economics department. Of course, we started to work on a better understanding of the banking system because, you know, one of the problems with the literature before the financial crisis, a huge problem, was that banks didn't exist, essentially, that money didn't exist. Okay, so that's really embarrassing, no? For a model about money that doesn't take money in the banking system into account. But there's a lot of work going on here on this topic. Essentially all, well, not really all, but the majority of PhD students in the last 10 years are working on essentially introducing extensions in the basic setting to take the banking system a bit more seriously into account. But that's not the end of the story. There are all financial frictions. So you know what? We got a hit. Because I think a little bit I'm in this side of the we got a hit, but we actually reacting quite effectively. We should have done that before, yeah? I agree. Okay. Our fault. We should have talked about these issues before the European session. That's absolutely true. And this actually goes back to what you said before. There is an increasing, I wouldn't say it's really so difficult, but it's an increasing interest in this idea of hysteresis. By the way, you don't need Keynesian or graphical model to generate hysteresis. You can actually do that in a much more mainstream approach. But this idea is slowly, building up momentum. Actually, I like it a lot. I think it's probably one of the points I would like to think a bit more in the future. It's because the data seem to be very clear about the presence of this hysteresis. Because essentially, the Great Recession hit the economy, the U.S. economy, and our economy so badly, and it takes a long time to recover. Okay? So these are ideas that people, even in mainstream, are analyzing quite in detail right now. So there has been a huge turmoil of new ideas in the profession. And this is actually not really entering right now. There has been some work, but I find it very interesting to see a paper by Akerlof, which is a very important and famous economist, on the Journal of Economic Perspective. It's actually still not published, it's forthcoming in 2019, about multiple equilibria, about the way we forgot one of the original contributions of Keynes, the beauty contest idea, no? One of the original contributions by Keynes about the importance of multiple equilibria. Multiple equilibria are not really so much liked by the classical economists. Okay? You get some kind of bad reaction when you see them, but probably we should probably change our mind and focus a bit more on that. Okay, so when I researched a bit about this speak, I found I already knew some of the papers, but I realized there is a very nice issue of the Oxford Review of Economic Policy, published in 2018, that contains a very large number of papers by leading scholars on the issue of rebuilding macroeconomic theory. And I suggest you, if you're interested in the topic, to read those papers because you have many different opinions, many different views about what's happening. So I'm going to select 3 authors and some ideas that those 3 authors explain in those papers. The first one is by Ricardo Reis. Ricardo Reis claims that current research, and he shows a number of examples of these. Current research done by young assistant professors, young PhD students going on the market right now. Current research is addressing the previously highlighted issues in many new, eclectic, and agnostic ways. So, the time of religion wars is definitely over. Okay? The way young researchers right now are addressing the issues is much more agnostic and much more eclectic and new to different, open to new and different ways than before. I would personally cite, just for the paper I was mentioning before, a paper by Caballero and Simsek. Actually, Simsek presented these 2 papers here last week in Bocconi. It's very interesting papers, and they have clearly Minskian and all Keynesian elements in them. And the entire economics department was cheering the papers, without complaining about Okay, fixed price, demand that drives output, Minsky and Keynes. Everybody was happy with that. So, the second statement I would like to highlight is the one by Blanchard. Blanchard is a very interesting paper, you probably know it very well. He concludes that current DSG models are flawed, but they contain the right foundations and must be improved rather than discovered. I know that many don't agree with me, I probably don't agree with me. But I strongly believe this is actually the right attitude. Now, I'm going to tell you a bit more about the reason why I believe this is the right attitude in the next slide. And then I would like to cite Krugman. I think Krugman is a great writer, okay? So I love this statement a lot. Okay? So Krugman forcefully states in a paper in his collection that possibly, but for the DSG modeling, because he's not very fond of DSG modeling, macro is in good shape, since apparently ISLM is good enough for government work. I love that statement. Okay? So essentially, policy makers around the world, they just don't look at these G models when they take the decisions. They just look at the standard, I guess, standard model, and everything which is needed is actually there. And somehow I agree with that. Okay, and many colleagues of mine actually do. And this takes me to teaching. Okay, this takes me to teaching. Okay, that's going to come in the next slide. So, and what's my very personal take on all this? So allow me a very personal take, my personal opinion. Okay? So, my personal opinion, I'm by trade a neoclassical economist. I've been trained as a neoclassical economist. I published papers in the agricultural literature many years ago, unfortunately, many years ago. So, I'm kind of knowledgeable about the literature and about how DSG evolved over time. And I'm still not ready, to be honest, even if I know quite a lot about the problems and the idiosyncrasies and the issues, the theoretical and methodological issues, I'm absolutely not ready to abandon, let's say. So micro-thermodynamic macro should not, in my opinion, and will not, okay, for sure, believe me, will not in the next years be dropped in the paper. At least not in the near future. Okay? And the reasons for this, in my opinion, are the following. Now, first of all, if properly used and understood, because not many, well, many understand it, but not many actually properly use it. It remains an extremely useful tool. But listen, it's a tool. It's a mean, not an end. Okay? It's a tool. You have to understand the tool and use it for what it is. And probably that's a big problem with literature that essentially caused our inability to explain the Great Recession, because the mindset is the problem. Okay? I'm convinced that in the end the problem lies more with the mindset of modern DSG users than with the approach itself. Okay, I'm open to criticism, but that's my opinion. I side a lot with Caballero's vision. I like the sentence, the pretense of knowledge syndrome. You have so sophisticated tools, they look very scientific, okay? Lot of equations, lot of math, okay? They look really serious, yeah, but they're not so serious at the end, okay? But you believe in them, you start to believe in them, you start to believe that the real world works like that, okay? And by the way, in the original RBC literature, I know a bit about it. It wasn't the case. So people like Cresco, you might find it, you may agree with him or not, but he was very aware of the fact that they were just using toy models. They weren't pretending that the toy models were actually the real world. Okay? They asked the question, how far can I go with that simple model? Okay, and that changed. With the introduction of DSG models, people started to think that that huge, complicated, mathematically sophisticated thing was actually the real world. The pretense of knowledge. And that's the problem. We should use them as tools, not as models. And of course, if you believe that your model is actually the real world, you become tyrannic. Okay? Your knowledge becomes tyrannic. You are dominating essentially the profession because you are the only one who knows. And it's not the case actually. Okay? And that's a big problem. We don't have to be tyrannic. Okay? We have to respect other views and listen to them. Okay? In my view. And then there is another very good reason, in my view. Now, listen. Consider how paradigm changes. Yes, okay. But I'm actually talking about what you... So, consider paradigm changes in economics. Common knowledge tells us that, at least I think, I'm not an historian, okay, so correct me if I'm wrong. I think that the common view is that the Keynesian revolution came after the Great Depression, okay, because essentially economies were not really able to understand how the Great Depression essentially was able to damage so much the economy and how to get out of it. So Keynes revolutionized economic theory, given his ability to explain the causes of the Great Depression and the tools to essentially take us out of it. And then essentially, what about the neoclassical counter-revolution? Okay. Well, common knowledge essentially tells us that the stagflation in the 70s was the moment in which Lucas and Sargent arrived and essentially introduced his new idea, rational expectations, the Lucas critique of 1975, 1976. But, you know, they didn't provide a new alternative explanation to something called stagflation, so the combination of inflation and unemployment, that apparently, it was not the case, but apparently traditional Keynesian models were not able to explain. What they brought on the table was a change in methodology. That's the reason why this revolution essentially won the war between all Keynesian and neoclassicals. A change in the methodology, okay? A paradigm shift, but in terms of methodology. Micro foundations, Russian expectations, and so on and so forth. And essentially, that's the reason why this revolution created a dominant paradigm in the midlife. And there's nothing like that right now out there. Okay? There's nothing like that. There are no new theories. There are no new facts that we're not able to explain. There's nothing like that. There is no reason for, at least in my very humble opinion, there is no reason for a change in paradigm. Okay? There is no credible alternative, in my humble opinion, again, able to survive the Lucas critique, which is still valid now as it was in 1976. Okay? If you understand exactly what Lucas was saying, the critique is very important, still valid right now. And by the way, I know about stocks for consistent models, okay? So I'm knowledgeable. Now, okay. Now let me link this to what I want to tell you about teaching, okay? So, I think Krugman is actually right. I don't like everything he writes, but he's a great writer. He really nailed it. Okay? As a matter of fact, almost all of the relevant intuitions needed to understand modern economic policy can be grasped in a slightly amended, not original one, okay? Slightly amended, IS, I'm afraid. And that's going to be the link between this part and the part of teaching. Okay? So, as far as teaching is concerned, the main question, I'm pretty sure that you're going to like it, okay? But I side with Mencken. I know you're not going to like it because there is a sentence written in the invitation for this debate that actually suggests a view which goes against my point here. Okay? That's the reason why I know that somebody here will not like it. So, Matthew has a very interesting paper on how to teach economics. You know, he's the author of probably the most used macro book in the world. So he says, undergraduate students are not there to learn your particular views of how the economy works. They are there to learn the foundational ideas that have been broadly established and accepted. Okay? So we're not there to change their mind. We're there to teach them what the average, the general consensus is. May like it or not, but that's our job as lecturers. So let me elaborate a little bit, okay? Because my position is a bit more elaborated. So at the undergrad level, we have two slightly conflicting aims, okay? They're always being conflicting. First of all, if you believe Mankiw, as I do, well, what you have to do is to teach mainstream, which is by definition broadly established and accepted by the profession, economics properly. That's your duty as a teacher, as a lecturer. Okay? But at the same time, and that's the conflicting aim, at the same time, you need to breed critical thinkers, and that's very difficult. Okay? That's not work. You don't have to, create believers. You have to create critical thinkers. We badly need social scientists able to interpret your world phenomena and policy. Okay? So the two goals are a bit conflicting. And there's an equilibrium to be reached here. Okay? It's very difficult. Okay, so some critical exposure to relevant alternative views, the story about talking to each other, is absolutely desirable, in my very personal view. Okay, but, however, okay, and I strongly believe that students should not be used as agents of change in order to reform economics from within, because it would not be in their best interest. Okay, so you have to let them know that there are alternative views, but your goal as a teacher, as a lecturer, is to teach them what the consensus is. Let them know that there are different views, but that's your job, okay? In my view. So, again, in my opinion, because a debate is about opinions at the end, okay? In my opinion, the consensus view right now regarding the typical intermediate macro course is, at the moment, because things are changing, as usual, it's not too far from the good old Solos core of usual macro. Okay? From this point of view, we're still very old-fashioned. So the core of usual macro, according to Solo, is essentially a Keynesian view of business cycle, plus basic stuff about financial markets, plus a classical view of the long run. If you recognize your 101 macro course, well, it's not random. It's not. So okay. So what I do, because I teach macro the first year, the way I personally try to put everything together. So my duty in teaching the mainstream, at the same time, my duty to let people think a little bit about alternatives. So my personal view of doing this is the following. Okay? So that's essentially a summary of the program of my first year macro course. So the traditional IS curve, okay, so that's the Keynesian view of demand driving up and so on. And then I spend a lot of time discussing money and banking, because, you know what? Teaching the classical standard IS LM model with upward sloping LM curve is, sorry about that, preposterous. Okay? The world doesn't work like that. It actually didn't for many, many years, since the end of Bretton Woods. Okay? So the way I do it is the following. I know that in the Blanchard book, the basic book, I love it. Okay? You see, you're surprised. I'm neoclassical, but they have open views. Okay? So the way the Blanchard book justifies the horizontal LM is actually, I think, preposterous. Okay? So that doesn't work. Okay? The idea in the book, and the idea in the standard way of putting this thing is, well, you just choose the interest, that's a pool view of monetary policy. You just choose the interest rate or the money stock, and you let the market choose the other one. And that's it. Okay? And Blanchard says, okay, fine. It's easier to choose the interest rate. Okay? It's much easier. So let's choose the interest rate as a policy variable. No, that's not the story. Okay? That doesn't work. Central banks, they know very well, if you read every single piece published by central bank on how money is created, on how interbank market works, they all tell you the same story, okay? Since the 70s exactly. So central banks choose the interest rate because that's the only thing they can choose, okay? They choose the interest rate. It's called the short-term interest rate doctrine. There's a very nice book by Binside and a very nice paper on the review of Keynesian economics by Binside and Collins that exactly explain all of these and links these to Basil Moore, an exponent of the post-Keynesian doctrine. I think his book is actually a hidden gem. We should really read that book a bit more. Because you know what? Essentially every single thing he's saying is actually how things turn out to work. So neoclassical, but open to different views. And actually, I wrote a little note about that, and I think it works quite well in explaining students the reason why central banks choose the interest rate as a policy variable. Okay? And then this appendix in the Blanchard about the money multiplier migrant. Okay, so it's really important. Okay, so then I go on with the Phillips curve and the IS-LMPC model. As in the Blanchard book, with all the problems that this thing has. Because I agree with you, the chapter on the labor market is, not. They just choose the simplest possible thing to do, the simplest possible way to do things. Then we spend time on risk premium, dual interest rates, and leverage ratios. Because if you understand the real world nowadays, you need to know what the leverage ratio is. There is no way out. Okay, you need to know what the leverage ratio is. And you need to know that interest rates are dual. So you have the policy rate of the central bank, and then there is a risk premium. Okay? Because investment depends on a rate that takes the risk premium into account. And that's the way the book explains essentially financial crisis, an increase in risk premium. I think it's a good approximation. And then I spent a little bit of time, and my students are not very happy about that, it's actually quite complicated, about how monetary policy is actually implemented. Corridors, floors, all the new armamentary of ways in which monetary policy is conducted. Okay? I always love to see the face of some colleague of mine when I tell them, but in the European Central Bank, the way the European Central Bank controls the interest rate is not by moving reserves, it's by moving the corridor. Oh, really? So there's no link between interest rate and reserves. Is that the case? Yes, it is, actually. If you read the documents in which central bankers tell you how to do it, you realize that, okay? So, and then of course the standard conducting international macro stuff and the solo model, okay? I'm very traditional from that point of view. Okay, now that's the undergrad stuff. Not many do that, but I do that in this university. I think it's in my opinion, a sufficiently reasonable equilibrium between standard stuff and some useful, not standard extensions. Now let me conclude with a couple of slides about more advanced courses and other stuff. So then I have to cut it short a little bit because I think time is running out.
5 minutes?
5 minutes, perfect. No, 10 is perfect. Okay? So now listen, as far as more advanced courses is concerned, well, there is not much you can do. Okay? So what you have to do is essentially to move towards a simple intertemporal framework, because you have to at some point give to your students a taste of what modern dynamic macro is. So at some point in their career you have to see at least a simple intertemporal framework. Essentially, what we typically do is use a two-period model that can take you very far in the realm of modern macro. You can do surprisingly many things in a very simple two-period model. By the way, I was forgetting, I forgot to put it there. As far as the dynamics of public debt is concerned, I dig a bit deeper. I don't look at the graphs you showed in the previous presentation, but I dig a bit deeper because the students in my course are a bit more mathematically able. And I show them the forward-looking relationship when we discuss the final condition, the story by Buter, on whether modeling has to be or not, has to be subject or not to a causality condition. So, if you want to know a bit more about the issues of introducing advanced macro to undergrad students, there are 3 very interesting articles with very different opinions. Yes, no, maybe, okay? Very different opinions about the issue. On the Journal of Economic Education, volume 49, issue 3, 2018. Okay? I don't have time to dig into details because essentially technical details take a lot of time, so you're not able to actually say so much in a given time. And there are some pros. A course like that takes your students a bit more in touch with current research. But I would like, and we actually do that in Bocconi, is that these move to a intertemporal framework should be followed by, or should be accompanied by a discussion of the historical evolution of paradigms in macro. Actually, my colleague Bocconi does that because he teaches the course after mine, and he starts with some history of economic thought, and then he starts with dynamic macro, essentially, with our two-period model. And he uses this very nice book by De Vreux, A History of Economics from Keynes to Lucas, and it's actually very nice. I suggest you, if you want to read about this stuff, it's a very interesting book. Okay? So, and finally, well, undergraduate, graduate, PhD. Hey, at the PhD level, there is no story, okay? There is no possible discussion. There is not much to be discussed, okay? So, there is something called the tyranny of 5. And there's a very nice empirical paper by Heckman, which is forthcoming on the Journal of Economic Literature. And the message is, if you want to get a position in the university, it's better for you to start to publish in the top 5 journals in economics, okay? It's a tyranny. So, if PhD students want to find a position in some top universities in Europe or America or whatever, there's nothing much you can do. You have to know everything on your classical ESG model. There's not much you can do, okay? If you want to have a position. So I'm not saying it's a good thing. Okay? I don't like it at all. But you know, whether I like it or not, it's not going to change the equilibrium. Okay? Now, listen. The fact that this paper here is coming out on the Journal of Economic Literature, it's a symptom that people start to realize in the profession that there is an issue. Okay? People start to realize there is an issue. But from realizing that there is an issue to a change in incentives and in way careers are constructed, that's going to take a lot of time. Okay? So, a final note to conclude with something I like very much. I would like to draw your attention, probably many of you already know about this project. I would like to draw your attention to a new, interesting, and in my opinion, very promising neighbor, the Curriculum Open Access Research Economic Project, the CORE project. They actually created a book, a freely available e-book, a web page, a course program, not in macro, in economics, okay? Economics at large. It's an extremely interesting thing. So let me show you quickly, just one more minute. Let me show you quickly the way Wendy Carwin and Bowles describe it. Okay? So it's essentially a new way to rebuild what we know about macro and a new way to teach it without big distinctions between macro and micro to students. I think it's a very brilliant idea. So the way they describe it, I just cut in a few things out of one of the paper. So the great mid-20th century thinkers, Keynes, Hayek, and Nash, that's their opinion of course, initiated a process that eventually transformed how we now understand the economy in 3 ways. So Keynes, the economics of demand. Okay? Hayek, economics of information. Information is scarce, okay, it has to be used properly. Nash, game theory, okay, strategic interactions. And what they claim is that only one of these made it into today's principal course. I slightly disagree with that, because in Bocconi we teach game theory, we teach arithmetic information in the first year. So, I don't know. But for sure not in macro, okay? For sure not in macro. Course introductory text, you can freely download it from the internet. Attempts to do for information economics and strategic social interaction what the famous or infamous, depending on the part of view, textbook by Samuelson did in the end of the 40s for demand. That textbook by Samuelson was the one that actually popularized the ISLM setting session. So CORE has made these concepts part of the foundation of the economic paradigm that can be effectively taught to introductory students. It seems that almost 100 universities are right now using these texts to teach economics, to lose many important places too. And I like a lot. This is not the what they call the consensus view right now, for sure. Okay, so don't expect this to be the course in Bocconi in the next years. But I suspect that slowly there is a small probability that this vision will, in the near future, at least affect a little bit the consensus view. Because I think that course is particularly interesting. So, I think I'm done. Thank you very much.
Well, as regards students as agents of change, my colleague gave you a lot of advices, suggestions. I do not have so many suggestions. I think that students have always been agents of change. and they paid for the consequences of their actions. This is history that explains this to us. I also think that my colleague is right when he says that DSG models are a basic necessity for careers. I agree with him. I studied Mascolel, Abraham in a very precise way in order to be an economist. I chose another paradigm, but I start from that. The important thing is to say that the SG models are a basis, but they might be only a possibility of development. There are also other possibilities. My colleague quoted Sam Bowles. Sam Bowles is a Marxist, and he published in the American Economic Review. Okay? So there are exceptions. Okay? Some exceptions. Very few, but there are exceptions. About Mencken. Mencken is very interesting. My colleague quoted Mencken, who says, students are there to learn the foundational ideas that have been broadly established and accepted. Yes, the problem is, which ideas are broadly established and accepted? If you examine the textbook written by Mencken, it is very different from the textbook by Blanchard. Let's have a look. Mencken starts from natural equilibrium determined on the neoclassical growth model. He starts from that. Blanchard starts from a Keynesian equation, ante-ISLM. Very different approaches to teaching and to research, I think. And regarding microfounded dynamic macro, my colleague says that microfounded dynamic macro should not and will not be dropped in the bin, at least not in the near future. I agree with you. Until the next recession. Maybe. I want to specify, maybe you know that, but I want to specify that micro foundations are not a feature which is specific of mainstream approach. Zraffa is micro-founded, and it is a very difficult microeconomics. You can read Kurz and Salvadori, Theory of Production, Long Period Analysis. Not easy, not at all. The point is that these micro foundations bring to another kind of solutions and views of the world. For example, as regards the Lucas critic, I agree with my colleague. No credible alternative to the Lucas critic. I agree with him, because Lucas critic is very important for all economists, not only for mainstream or Zraffa or Marxist. It is very important. But the point is that if you adopt one or the other approach, you can interpret Lucas critic in very different terms. For example, my question now, from a Zraffian point of view, what are the reactions of economic agents to policy? What are? It depends on the approach. And the second one is, what is the pivot? What is the attractor of the system? It depends on the point of view. And this has implications for our interpretation of the Lucas critique. Okay? And furthermore, as regards that GDP stability, I know it is very easy what I showed, but it is important to clarify that what I showed can be applied to more complex models, for example, to the model that you teach in your courses. It is a very general approach which can be applied to the more complex analysis, mainstream analysis. This is not the point. Okay. Yes, it's okay. Okay.
So let me clarify for a second what I meant with my statement on agents of change. I agree with you that young people are always agents in that sense. I fully agree with that. Okay. But what I meant is the following. You shouldn't change the mind of young students because that will change economics from within. What you should do is, with the strength of your argument, change the consensus view, and then in that way, by changing the consensus view, change indirectly the way the minds of your young students. Because your young students will enter a market, a world in which the consensus view dominates. So if you let them somehow, if you let them without a full understanding of the consensus view, you are actually damaging them in the long run, in my very humble opinion. So the idea is, alternative views are important. I fully respect them. I like to discuss alternative views. You saw that my own teaching is actually somehow informed by this position. But if I adopt an alternative idea, it's because it's actually a good idea. It's because I like it, because I think it's something that is valid, okay? So, and this idea convinced me to change my view of the world. And in that way, I'm going to teach my students a different view of the world, because I am convinced, okay? So, if alternative views have to convince me to change my view, and I'm still a classical economist, even if you read a lot of alternative stuff, if these alternative ideas have the power to change my view of the world, well, at that stage, that view of the world will be something I'm going to transmit to my students, okay? But only if the consensus view, my own view, is changed by powerful, new, and correct ideas. Okay? Is intuition clear? Is the idea clear? Okay? So I don't want to think that you may be willing to essentially teach something just because that may spread someday and change from within the profession. So that's my position.
So,
I think we have an hour.
Professor Brancaccio has 15 minutes, so if someone wants to ask him some questions, this is the moment. Raise your hands. No questions? Okay.
Good evening. I was just wondering if that comparative approach that was like the idea of building a stereogram that can be applied into different models is applicable to any model, or if there are like limitations in the cases, because like I believe or I think that maybe some things cannot just be put in an equation and then you change the numbers or the formulas and it works. So I was wondering if that's like the right intuition or not.
Other questions? Come on, guys. This is the moment where you can put into discussion the phenomenology.
Can I do it without the mic?
Yeah.
Okay. So the question is, you said that there is the dictatorship of the five, but on the other hand, you say we should convince the mainstream with the strength of our arguments. So how can we both combine, like enter into the mainstream, which is dictated by the five, if we cannot convince them?
You can't. That's the issue. That's the reason why it's an issue. And that's the reason why the profession starts to slowly understand that. Okay? I didn't tell you it was easy. Okay? Where was that? How can I say? You're right, but that's the way it works. It's difficult.
I have a question.
Okay. Tonight, so
would it be good, possible to introduce a mandatory course of history of economic thinking in undergraduate courses to broaden the frame of the teaching, of the education?
You're opening a can of worms, understand?
I agree with your proposal, it is clear. And as regards what your colleague said, let me just say that I showed you the evolution of Olivier Blanchard because it was not obvious that the chief economist at the IMF could approach to alternative paradigms. It was not obvious, with all the caveat of Blanchard, because he is very prudent, he is very yes, but Paul Romer is much more aggressive in his dialectics. But in anyway, there might be some change even in the top fives. There might be some change. I agree with my colleague about the necessity to be prudent. Students must be careful about their life. This is very important. I agree with you. But things may change, even because, as Kant said, change does not depend on change in minds. Change does depend on material transformation. This is the point. That's why I said I agree with my colleague until next recession, because facts are stronger than minds. This is the point. Okay, thank you so much.
Two different ways to be pragmatic. Praxis, national praxis, and pragmatism, Anglo-Saxon pragmatism. Okay?
Professor Brancaccio, okay. There was the question about the comparative approach.
Okay.
There was the question about the comparative approach.
Yes, excuse me. I don't know if I understood what you said. The point is that if we want to change, to reverse a model, we do not have freedom. It is not a problem of freedom. We must accept a reversal which is founded on a specific paradigm, scientific paradigm. I showed you in a very simple way two paradigms which have two different histories and evolutions. So you cannot be free in your choice. You must be within a line of research. This is very important. And then we can choose between the different possibilities, the different possible reversals, on the basis of many things, such as empirical analysis, because empirical analysis is one of the basic tests for choosing between paradigms.
Again, just a question is the state of the art in the economic academia in Italy about the teaching of economic courses, for example? Because in other countries they already started to, I don't know, change micro and macro courses, but I think also about important, very prestigious universities such as Cambridge. They introduce a heterodox economics courses. So here in Italy, we discussed about the necessity or not to rethink economic courses here in this debate, but what about you professors, you faculties? What is the state of the discussion about it? Because we understood that students cannot, change the state of the situation, but maybe just teaching them that there are different views. I don't know, they already started to do that in other countries, so thank you.
Thank you. Leaving aside questions of what theories or perspectives to teach for a moment, I wanted to ask, given so few students, even somewhere at Bocconi, especially undergraduate students, will end up becoming academic economists, whatever theories we're teaching, should we maybe bear in mind more the professions that people might actually go into, and maybe look at more practical details rather than the details of the theory, whatever theory you think it should be?
I want to ask this question to actually Professor Maffezzoli. I didn't probably understand, I think, why it's so important to give this role of honor to consensus economics. Okay. On one hand, this could actually fit into the problem of the Big Five, right? If so many economists grow up learning that mainstream economics is like special, okay? Then maybe those people will be the boards of those journals in the future. And mostly, I don't like, and I wanted to know what you think about this, the fact that the burden to convince is solely placed on heterodox economics. Because, like, if we say we should teach orthodox, and if heterodox is good enough, it will convince people, then why shouldn't we teach all of them? And if orthodox is also good enough, it will convince people by itself, by the strength of its ideas, right? I wanted to hear a thought about this.
Okay, as regards teaching, it is very difficult to change teaching programs, and it is very difficult to propose alternative approaches to teaching. The anti-Blanchard was born with the aim to stay side by side with Blanchard's macroeconomics. I tried to propose very little textbook, which could be taught and learned in just 3 lessons, 6 hours. The nucleus of this book can be learned in very few lessons. The reason was that I did not have space, okay? So, it is very difficult to enlarge the space for alternative theories in teaching programs. It is very difficult today. The anti-Blanchard is a consequence of this difficulty. As regards the Keynes spoke about the practical man. Okay? Augusto Graziani, one of my maestri, okay? Yes, mentors, said that he wanted to teach at the first year undergraduate students with a very provocative book based on the history of economic thought, because he was convinced that practical men needed alternatives in their minds. This is not only a problem for economists and young researchers. This is a problem for culture, for knowledge, in a very broad sense.
Okay, so let me see. Okay, so let me see if I recall the question. First of all, the question about how we address crisis. Okay, I don't know about Italian universities, to be very honest with you, okay, but I know about Bocconi. What I know is that we try hard, at least I tried, and my colleagues that I know of, Francesco Devate, for instance, and many others, we try hard to teach the basic intuitions that help you to understand the mechanisms behind the financial crisis. I suspect that we have, I would say, we have a reasonably good understanding of the mechanisms. Okay? Many of these mechanisms are difficult to teach at the undergrad level. You can do it, but you have to find a way to convey certain intuitions in a way which is accessible to undergrad students. So my opinion is that we, in our undergrad program, it's a bit more complex than just deciding to teach a course like that. Okay? So it's another theory. Yeah, exactly. Don't tell me first. So it would be very nice, actually. I would love it. Okay? I think that one of the two most interesting courses I had as an undergrad was sociology and history of economics. Okay? So that's my opinion. Then, you're a laugh. I don't agree with you. Okay? I don't agree with you at all. Okay? Now, you're right in saying, and I think that's linked to many things I say actually during the presentation. You're completely right. The majority of students, of undergrad students, will not become professional economists. And it's exactly that reason why I feel compelled to teach them essentially the standard consensus view. What Krugman called, I guess I'm good for government work, because that's what people have in mind when they take policy decisions. Larry Summers claimed that when they had to decide what to do because he was actually an insider, but when they had to decide what to do to respond to the Great Recession in the US, okay, they just went back to good old standard Keynesian, old-fashioned Keynesian thinking. Okay, they didn't look at the G models. Okay. So if you want to be an academic economist, ESG, as I told you before, in my opinion, is a necessity. It's good because it's a very good tool. It's a very useful tool. But if I have to teach to people that is going to enter the labor market, I'm going to teach them essentially the standard stuff, the consensus view, because that's good enough. That's going to allow them to understand properly what's going on, because people that take decisions have essentially that model in mind. Okay? Is the intuition clear? Okay. What was you? What was your question? Whether essentially teaching always the same stuff actually feeds the tyranny of the five, essentially.
Yeah.
Something like that?
Yeah, mostly that.
Yeah, you're actually right in some sense, but my point was, I hope I was able to convey that properly, but my point was essentially that I'm very careful about playing with the future of students, essentially. Okay? So I'm willing to provide them with a sound, robust understanding. At the same time, I'm trying to feed them a little bit of interesting new ideas. But, which relates to what I was saying to your colleague over there, undergrad students need to have a solid background that allows them to understand the real world and allows them to sell themselves from the labor market, essentially. Students of economics is something else. When you go on studying, at some point you'll be able on your own, if somebody gives you a little bit of an open mind, you're going to be able on your own to find your way and to discover alternative theories. Okay? But that's a different path from what a standard undergrad student that will at some point enter the labor market has to take. Okay? So essentially, once you study economics properly, you have possibilities to enlarge your views if you look for them. The question is, will you look for them? Well, that's our job. We have to teach the mainstream, but at the same time, give the possibility to willing students to essentially open their mind a little bit. Okay, that's my opinion. Yeah, please.
But why should only willing students be able to? Why should only willing students be able to expand over this? Like,
it's a bit difficult for students to do something.
No, first. I mean, like a mainstream thought is, and why should it be why should it have a more important place? How can I say that?
Okay. I'm not yeah, you made the point before. I forgot about that point. Okay. Now listen. Even if I'm sympathetic with alternative views, I'm still aware of the fact that what you call mainstream, it's at the end a very solid body of consolidated knowledge. There's a huge amount of empirical evidence. I mean, it took the standard RBC, took the standard simple one equation RBC model. That little guy, you can't really decide that thing as long as you want. Explains yourself 65–70% of relative fluctuations in macro-variables. Okay, we don't believe in that. Good. But there is a huge body of work. There's a huge body of theoretical and empirical work. And many smart people believe and work on those models. The majority of researchers work with that framework. So you're claiming, why should the board of proof be on alternative views? Well, because the majority of people working in the profession believe a particular approach. And it's just the way it works. If the majority thinks something, the outsider has the duty to essentially try to move it. Now it's difficult. I know it's difficult. And that's the reason why alternative ideas have to be really good. And it's possible, has been done. What do you think Lucas did in the 70s? Okay? He was a young student. I heard rumors, people told me. I mean, when Sargent, for the first time, read one of his papers about this idea of commercial application, Tom Sargent was a Keynesian, was running from one office to the other, telling people, look, he's right, wait this stuff. It was a powerful idea, okay? And it was alone. Okay? Keynesian economics was the mainstream at the time. So ideas can change, but they have to be powerful ideas. Okay? And the burden is on new ideas, not on established ideas. And that's the way it is. I mean, in my opinion, again, in my humble opinion.
Richard Thaler said that ideas change because economists.
Yeah. That's another part of the story.
The populistic view, and we can close the session.